the daily activities of the judiciary. We've seen some courts actually close their sittings. And now let's link up with our senior political affairs reporter, Murimi Mwangi, who's at the Milimani Law Courts, just to bring us up to date with what's happening. Murimi Mwangi, good morning. So how are the activities at the courts? Are we having any sittings? Because so far we know that there's some courts in Nakuru that have actually had to close, business.
Well, quite some time of reckoning for the judiciary. Some courts are sitting here, but from different parts of the country, there are court sessions that have had to be consolidated in different towns away from where the litigants would ideally be hearing their cases. And that, of course, means some cases have had to be postponed. Tribunals that have had to suspend their sittings due to the budget cuts. But to just get a clear picture, let's talk to a former JSC commissioner who also has been representing clients for quite some time in the courts, Professor Tom Ojienda, to just get to hear to what extent these budget cuts have affected perhaps his clients and others that have come seeking services from the courts. Wakili, thank you so much for joining us today. The budget cuts on the judiciary and reports that this has affected quite a lot in terms of operations of the courts. Any that has come to your attention from some of your clients?
Thank you, Murimi. I will tell you this, that the budget cuts are real. I have had matters that have collapsed out of station because of circuits that a number of judges are not able to attend to. I will tell you that the Environment Tribunal, for instance, cannot sit. The Corporate Tribunal is not sitting. The circuits for judges in Mombasa, we have circuits with Malindi for Mombasa judges, cannot work. We have circuits from Nakuru to other stations that is not working. And I'll tell you that even judges who are supposed to be sitting and who are supposed to be back from vacation are not there. It is affecting the dispensation of justice. Today I had some matters in the anti-corruption division. Unfortunately, they have collapsed because Judge Onyego is indisposed. But it's worrying that we cannot be able to proceed with our matters in the normal manner, but largely because it is not just us advocates who come to court and get frustrated, but we come to court and have to ask our clients that courts are not sitting. I'll tell you this, that the judiciary needs to have a budget to function. The judiciary must be cushioned against the interruptions that we see.
But a quick one, Prof. Before we talk about the independence and the financial independence of the JSC, because we have to come to that, perhaps for Kenyans out there who have been affected, say I have a matter in Malindi, and now due to this directive, my matter has been transferred, say, to Mombasa. What then happens to the scheduling of the cases that are to be had in Mombasa, and how soon perhaps would I expect my matter, which was to happen in Malindi, to be had in Mombasa? And what does that tell, even in terms of the availability of the judicial officers to hear my matter when it's finally scheduled there?
I'll tell you, for instance, the Land Court here has dates in 2021. Next year there are no dates. So if you lose a date this year, you can be sure that the next date will be in 2022. The diary is that bad because we lack judges. The Land Court judges, we lack judges. And judges have not been sworn in by the president yet. So I'll tell you this. We have a crisis that is growing by the day. The person who suffers is the small person, it is the client, because it is them whose cases cannot be heard. I am sure that if the traffic court collapses, or if the criminal courts are not able to proceed, then the effects will be dire, because then that would have a ripple effect on the holding in the cells, and that would then affect the arrests. You can imagine that. So it goes all back. So the justice chain must function. It is like a wheel that must function and that must run. And it is being affected badly by these budget cuts.
But Wakili, the directive from the acting Treasury CS, Ukuri Atani, was not singular on only the judiciary. It also affected other government departments. So what makes the judiciary special in your opinion? And perhaps why have you been affected in terms of the cases and not other budget cuts which would not ideally affect the ongoing cases that are before court or those that are expected to come within the intervening period?
I think the reason why the judiciary has been affected more than any other institution is because when the budget of the judiciary was presented in the last budget, the judiciary got recurrent. What they got was the recurrent budget and just a bit to spend on the running of its affairs. So it's largely affected because the clawback, the 50% budget cut, affects its operations directly. It eats into all the monies that the judiciary had to function with, to ensure that justice is dispensed. I think that's the difference. And remember, the judiciary's budget is just about 0.25 of the national budget. It's not much. Unlike other departments of government that would have other headings from which they can borrow. So the judiciary is largely constrained because even when they present their budget to Parliament, of course, a parliamentary function, they still end up having their budgets drawn back. And that is why now there's litigation around the question as to whether Parliament should cut back on the judiciary budget to make it impossible for them to function. I think that is the reality that we are facing now.
Wakili, former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga began what he called the expansion of, the access to justice with the opening of high courts in nearly every corner of this republic. But these budget cuts happening now in terms of expansion of the accessibility of justice. What does this mean for the common mwananchi at the grassroots who cannot access the courts in the future?
The most affected would be the mobile courts in counties out there, because mobile courts will not operate if there are no finances. Secondly, of course, we have courts in most counties. Most of the court projects out there are not complete. It means that the budget cuts will affect development. It will affect programs run by the judiciary directly. It will affect the function of the judiciary directly out there and even in Nairobi.
Wakili, you've served before as a commissioner in the JSC, and JSC is essentially the financial or operational engine of the judiciary. And part of the thinking for the framers of the Constitution in coming up with the JSC, the Parliamentary Service Commission, was to give these institutions financial autonomy, which was to translate to the independence of the institutions. Yet this is happening now. You're having budget cuts. What does this mean for the independence of the judiciary, even looking at it in terms of finances, because that also affects your independence in terms of the decisions that come from the judiciary?
The threat to judicial independence is real. And I expect the current Judicial Service Commission to stand up and to speak to the question of both autonomy but also budgetary and financial independence. That is how the judiciary can then transition and deliver justice. You cannot deliver justice to the public if you do not have resources. Judges will not deliver or function when they are not able to afford foolscaps, software and hardware to function. Magistrates will not deliver if they are not able to move or are not facilitated. The judiciary needs a healthy budget to function. And I also tell you, Murimi, we also need the judges of the High Court and the Court of Appeal who are appointed, sworn in, so that we have healthy numbers to be able to keep up with the work that is out here. Because we have huge backlogs in the judiciary, and that needs to be tackled as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Prof. Former Commissioner to the JSC, Tom Ojienda, talking to us about the implications of the budget cuts on the judiciary. Remember, this is happening at a time when there is an ongoing case at the High Court filed by city lawyer Adrian Kamotho Njenga in relation to the delayed, swearing in of the judges who have already been approved by the official employer, the Judicial Service Commission. And in that particular case, the head of public Service, Joseph Kinyua, recently swore in an affidavit in which he said the president is still consulting on that particular matter after information came to his attention that there were integrity questions on some of the names that had been presented to him for appointment to be judges of the superior courts. That, of course, igniting further debate because also part of the reasons why the president, through the head of public service, said he's yet to appoint the judges was that the judiciary had not adequately consulted other stakeholders, including the National Treasury, on the availability of funds for, recruitment of the new judicial officers. And it is a stalemate that continues because the matter is still before the High Court, even as the implications of these budget cuts continue to bite across the country in the judiciary. Back to you, Brenda, in studio.
Murimi, now that you've seen, some courts, being business, hearing of court cases is not going on, is there a possibility, of having court cases at the Milimani Law Courts also stall?
Well, it has implications on cases across the country. Remember, there is a tradition in the judiciary where if a judge has been handling a matter and is transferred from a particular station and that matter is at a critical stage, that judge will still have to create time in his or her schedule to move to that particular station to hear that particular case. And what has been affected is the movement of judicial officers besides the movement of the tribunals across the country to handle different cases. And therefore, as the judge creates time for particular matters outside his station and scheduling that within particular times when time can allow, that also affects the workload on his or her current station. It also means that for the person waiting for the particular judge from another station to move to their station to hear a particular matter has to wait longer, even as participants or litigants in the case also consult as to if that matter can be transferred from one judge to another. Remember, it is at a point when there is also a crisis in terms of the staffing of the High Court, the Labor Relations Division of the High Court, as well as the Land and Environment Division. And remember, these were two divisions which retired Chief Justice Willie Mutunga created during his tenure as a measure to offset the workload that was on the High Court in terms of the backlog of the cases, so that matters specifically dealing with land would be heard by land judges. Matters relating to disputes in employment would be handled by the Labor Relations Division. And these are two divisions of the High Court that have been quite starved in terms of staffing and have been affected by this workload, which of course now is going to be complicated by the budget cuts, which also affect operations of the judiciary, but perhaps affected the most the tribunals that have been moving across the country. These also having been created as a measure to, offload some of the backlog from the main divisions of the High Court as well as the magistrate courts. Brenda.
All right, thank you so much, Murimi Mwangi. Judiciary budget cut affecting court cases. Let's have a listen to the story that was filed by my colleague Willie Lusige on